Farah grew up in a small weathered house tucked at the edge of Seattle, Washington. The roof leaked during rainstorms, and the wooden porch creaked under even the lightest footsteps. The walls held more than just photographs and furniture. They held secrets, arguments, and silence. Farah was the second oldest of four children. Her world was loud and chaotic, not because of joy, but because of her father's voice, booming, angry, unpredictable, and the fear it carried like an echo through the narrow halls. Her father had once been charming, or so her mother had said. But Farah didn't remember those days. What she remembered were the sudden outbursts, the way he'd smash plates against the wall when dinner wasn't hot enough, or scream until their youngest brother cried in confusion. Sometimes his cruelty came as words sharper than any blade, but other times it came with the sting of his hand. Their mother worked long shifts at a bakery, her hands calloused from kneading dough and her back bent from years of standing. She tried her best to protect the children, but she was tired, exhausted in a way that settled in her bones. At night, she'd sit quietly at the kitchen table, her shoulders slumped, her tea cold. Farah would sometimes creep from her room and find her there, staring blankly at the wall, silent tears running down her cheeks. Farah learned early to walk quietly, to speak softly, to be the buffer between her father and her siblings. She'd scoop up the baby when the yelling started. She'd distract her younger sister with a story when things got too loud. Her older brother, once defiant, had learned to disappear, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. But Farah stayed. She stayed because she was afraid of what might happen if she didn't. Still, in the quiet corners of her life, Farah dreamed. She dreamed of freedom, of silence that wasn't laced with tension, of love that didn't hurt. More than anything, she dreamed of writing. Books became her refuge. Newspapers were her teachers. She filled notebooks with observations, feelings, and stories. Her room was small, but her imagination was vast. By the time she turned 18, Farah knew she couldn't stay. She couldn't breathe in that house anymore. So one warm summer night, while her family slept, she packed a small bag with clothes, her journals, and a crumpled envelope of cash, money her grandmother had given her in secret years before, for when you need to go. She didn't leave a note. She just left. She took a Greyhound bus to New York City, a place she had never seen except in movies and magazines. She watched the skyline emerge in the early morning light, her heart pounding with fear and wonder. The buildings were taller than she imagined. The streets buzzed with life. Everything was fast, everything was loud, and everything was possible. Farah checked into a shelter for young women. It was crowded and not always clean, but it was safe. She shared a room with two other girls and kept her head down. During the day, she worked long hours at a small grocery store, bagging items and smiling politely at customers. At night, she studied. She borrowed old textbooks from the library and studied for the college entrance exams. It wasn't easy. She cried into her pillow more nights than she could count, but she didn't stop. After nearly a year, her persistence paid off. She received an acceptance letter from a small journalism college in Brooklyn. She stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, her hands trembling. The words blurred with tears of disbelief. She was in. She was going to college. Farah moved into the dorms, sharing a room with a girl named Marcy, who had a loud laugh and a kind heart. She attended lectures, scribbled notes feverishly, and absorbed everything. Her professors noticed her quickly. She was quiet, but her writing spoke loudly. Her essays were raw, emotional, and real. They came from a place of truth. One afternoon, after a lecture on war reporting, a fellow student approached her. His name was Samir. He was tall, with thoughtful eyes and a permanent scarf around his neck, even in summer. "Your article about refugee families," he said softly. "It moved me. I just wanted to tell you that." Farah blushed, unused to compliments. "Thank you. That means a lot." They started spending more time together, first as study partners, then as friends. They would walk through Prospect Park, sipping coffee and talking about politics, family, and dreams. Both were children of immigrants. Both had struggled with belonging. Both believed in the power of storytelling. Their friendship blossomed into love, a gentle, deep kind of love. Samir respected her silence and listened to her stories. He never pushed her to speak more than she wanted to. He made her laugh. He made her feel safe. On graduation day, as their names were called and their robes fluttered in the wind, Samir pulled her aside after the ceremony. Under a tree, with the city skyline behind them, he got down on one knee and opened a small velvet box. Farah gasped. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice trembling. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. 100 times yes. But life, as she had learned, does not always follow a script. A few months later, Samir began feeling unwell. He was tired. He lost weight. He couldn't focus. After multiple doctor visits and tests, they got the diagnosis: leukemia. The word landed like a punch to the chest. The months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, medications, and quiet prayers. Farah stayed by his side every moment. She read to him, held his hand, tried to smile even when her heart was breaking. He fought bravely. They hoped. They dreamed. But 6 months later, on a gray November morning, Samir passed away. Farah was shattered. Grief hollowed her out. She stopped writing. She stopped laughing. She could barely eat. The world, once so vibrant, felt muted and distant. But eventually, the world kept turning, and so did she. Slowly. She needed to work. Rent was due. Her savings were gone. She applied to dozens of journalism jobs. No one called back. Then, one rainy afternoon, as she wandered into a bookstore to escape the cold, she heard a familiar voice. "Farah?" It was Professor Hadi, her old mentor. They sat on a bench outside, the smell of wet pavement in the air. She told him everything about Samir, the rejections, her fear of returning home. He listened, then smiled gently. "You still have that fire in you. I know someone at a women's magazine looking for new voices. Would you like me to make an introduction?" Farah nodded. "Yes, please." 2 days later, she sat across from an editor named Layla. A sharp woman with kind eyes, Layla read Farah's writing samples in silence. "You've lived through something," she finally said. "I can feel it in your words. We'll start you with a trial article." Farah went home and poured herself into it. She wrote about love and loss, about starting again. The piece resonated. Letters poured in. One woman wrote, "Your words made me feel seen." The magazine hired her full time. Life slowly began to return. Farah moved into a small, sunlit apartment in Queens. She hung string lights and grew potted plants. She adopted a rescue cat and named him Dusty. She began writing regularly, editing stories from new writers, mentoring young interns. At a writers' panel one evening, she met Elias, a documentary filmmaker with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor. They talked about truth in media, healing through storytelling, and their favorite books. They became friends. Then more. Farah was cautious. Elias was patient. 2 years later, they married in a small ceremony surrounded by friends, flowers, and soft music. No fanfare, just love. Now, Farah is a senior editor. She walks to work with a warm drink in hand, smiles at the sunrise, and tells her 2 children stories each night. "You can be anything," she whispers as she kisses their foreheads. "You can go anywhere. Don't forget that." And when she lies in bed, staring at the ceiling, she sometimes remembers that scared girl with a backpack, standing at a bus station. She remembers the noise, the pain, the loss. But mostly, she remembers the choice. She chose to survive. She chose to dream. She chose to begin again. Because no matter how long the night is, the sun will always rise.